Now I'm gonna go there without the glasses so there's no mistake. Last time I heard, the president of Bolivia, Evo Morales, was in an embassy. He was, I believe, in the Mexican embassy. He was not in office. There had been protests for several years, specifically protests concerning indigenous women's groups that were in opposition to policy involving Bolivia's energy sector, specifically the gas and oil sector. I had been following that since before the Cochabamba meeting that occurred, I believe, in 2010, but also specifically with various things that happened in 2015 and 2016. As a matter of fact, there was a very significant protest that occurred in Bolivia at the time that the Pope was visiting Mexico. And I remember this being very noteworthy and very important because the Pope had postponed his visits to Mexico several times. And it was a very different kind of resonance than what his presentation before Congress in the United States was in the fall of 2015. Now, there have presumably been these significant problems with Bolivia's leadership under Evo Morales, specifically in understanding that women in indigenous leadership have felt inclined to protest him and policy under his milieu. But now we've also got another situation concerning Venezuela and this understanding that we're supposed to believe in this country that Maduro is unfit to lead and needs to be deposed, and in his place, we need to support somebody alleged to have been democratically elected. Now, I'm not certain I can say his name correctly. Sometimes people can't say my name correctly. But my understanding is this. Prior to the election at which he is alleged to have been elected, Mr. Guaido, this is, my understanding is that there was another election planned and it had been postponed. And while that election in Venezuela had been postponed, in the United States, there was significant election fraud. I was specifically witness to how an act of election fraud ended up impacting the implementation of major legislation changes in Australia connected to the health and human services system that was also involved with reactions concerning an earthquake in another country. I know how it happened. I saw it happen. I've been able to prove how it could have been stopped. I've also been able to prove how it was strategically done at that time to impact international events to prepare for what happened during the 2018 election. And it is one of the reasons why I contend that nobody elected during the 2018 congressional or midterm election in the United States is in office legitimately. If they were elected prior to 2018 and were going for re-election, that's one thing. If they're fresh people and this is their first election, that's another thing. But the point of the matter is there was so much of an orchestrated implementation of fraud connected to the 2018 election that nobody claiming they were elected in that election is legitimately elected. It's another reason why, in January of this year, before there was any announcements of this COVID situation, but there was another national security crisis at the moment, I said verbally, and I did what I needed to do to affirm this, that if I had been elected, I would have gotten together with a group of people and I would have availed myself of a process that is already in a previous appropriations bill concerning a legitimate, legal, constitutional emergency measure members of Congress can take to deal with a destabilization of the system at this level. And I would have let the American people know after I let my campaign know and my local district know that I understood there had been fraud involved with my election and that I had not been legitimately elected, and that as a result, there were going to have to be measures that were taken. And that the concern was that at that time, without the legitimacy of an actual election, that there was a potential for other events of fraud and other misrepresentation of the constitutionality of what was going on to be able to proliferate. This was at the middle of January when I said this. I gave a 72-hour deadline to identify if anybody else would take any action that would let me know that anybody on a congressional or senatorial level was aware of the profundity of what was going on. Let's just say there weren't direct, publicly accessible cues or notifications, but I am not the only one that understood that at that time. Now, so far as I know, nobody has made this declaration. We've had some other kinds of dog and pony shows going on, right? Literal dog and pony shows. That's the level it's at. But this is the understanding. I believe that Maduro suspended that election, not just because he's a tyrant. Is he authoritarian? He may well be. But he suspended that election because he understood it was a fraudulent election. Did he see anything about what happened during the Honduran election in 2017? You don't think people in other countries actually pay attention to the processes that are going on in countries that are neighboring them, or maybe in their tier level, right? And so there were already notifications about what could have been identifiable as significant acts of election fraud. And so the election was postponed. And then after the election had been postponed, and after it had been postponed in a manner that correlated with election fraud that had already been established via interference in another foreign country's election, then allegedly Guaido was elected by the will of the people, and now there's this power struggle. Well, I just yesterday found that the Department of Justice filed charges concerning Venezuela's oil sector the day they should have been entering and moving on a 300-page report about racketeering in the United States that was, at that time, responsible for murdering an attorney general in this country and murdering a Supreme Court justice in this country, and was in the process of murdering a senator and setting up the murder of a congressional representative, had already murdered a mayor, had already murdered a public defender. And they waited for a couple of days because they're trying to use it as insurance to cover up for a bankrupt insurance company instead of prosecuting crimes connected to organized crime. This is why I contend that Venezuela did not default. It was bond fraud. And there's plenty of it to go around. There was no reason for them to deflect that and then 1 year later try to get me to agree to accept a driver's license that was supposed to be a sidecar account for the former minister of Venezuela's gas and oil sector. And it's exactly what they did. I filed reports. It's on the record. I let them know. They stole my email. I still got the evidence. I'm not dying, and they're not getting away with it.